would love to see Canada be the 51st state. The Canadian citizens, if that happened, would get a very big tax cut, tremendous tax cut.
Donald Trump back on his 51st state talk. The U.S. president resurrecting his comments.
Trump continues to pitch ideas regarding U.S. expansion and redrawing the world map. Among them, making Canada the 51st state.
He's out there back on his 51st state. Again, I'm going to ignore him. I'm going to start focusing with our federal government what we can do to be more competitive, to lower taxes, create the environment and conditions for companies to come here and invest in Ontario. That's what we need to do.
A spark that shook nations. It began as just another comment, casual, loud, and unexpected. Donald Trump once again floated the idea of making Canada the 51st state of America. To some, it was just classic Trump showmanship. But in Canada, it hit differently. Within hours, the word spread like wildfire, from Toronto cafes to Vancouver newsrooms. People weren't laughing. They were reflecting. Was it just a joke? Or something deeper? A reflection of how America truly views its northern neighbor. For years, Canada had quietly walked beside the U.S., strong allies, close friends, but always unequal in size and influence. This time, something changed. Those 6 words, Canada, the 51st state, didn't divide Canadians, they united them. A new wave was forming, of pride, purpose, and patriotism. And it all started with a single sentence. The comment that echoed Trump stood before cameras, smiling, half joking, half serious. Canada would get a tremendous tax cut if it became the 51st state. Laughter in the room. But in Canada? Silence, followed by outrage. Talk shows, news anchors, and online forums exploded. Canadians debated, argued, and reflected. For some, it was another reminder that America often overlooks its neighbors' independence. For others, it was a wake-up call, a push to rethink economic and political dependency. Political leaders from both sides, liberal and conservative, found rare unity. Canada is not a state. Canada is a nation. That statement became a rallying cry across the country. Something was shifting in the national psyche. Pride, long quiet, was finding its voice. Because sometimes, the smallest insult can spark the biggest realization of who you truly are. A nation reacts. What followed wasn't anger, it was awakening. Across Canada, ordinary people started talking about independence, not from friendship, but from reliance. Families began sharing hashtags like #Buy Canadian and Stand Strong Canada. Suddenly, grocery store aisles looked different. People checked labels twice. Cafes started promoting local farmers. Even schools encouraged students to learn about Canadian brands and history. In living rooms, the mood was clear. We're proud of who we are. And while American media barely noticed, the tremors were already being felt across borders. It wasn't about Trump anymore, it was about identity. A nation that had always been polite was now standing tall, calm but unshakable. For the first time in decades, Canadians realized they didn't need to shout to be heard. Their unity was louder than any speech. The boycott begins. The boycott didn't start with laws, it started with people. From small towns to big cities, Canadians began quietly pulling away from American products. McDonald's saw drops in traffic. Big retail chains noticed slower sales. U.S. wine exports to Canada fell sharply. And yet, it wasn't hostility, it was dignity. The movement had heart. It wasn't about hate, it was about home. Local artists, entrepreneurs, and farmers felt something they hadn't in years: national support. People were buying Canadian, promoting Canadian, and proud of it. Economists soon took notice. This wasn't just social media noise, it was an economic shift in motion. Canada wasn't turning away from the world, it was turning toward itself. Politics and pride. As the movement grew, Ottawa responded. The Prime Minister's office released a clear statement. Canada's friendship with the U.S. is strong. but friendship must always rest on respect. Political rivals, usually divided, stood together for once. They agreed, sovereignty isn't negotiable. In Washington, however, confusion reigned. Officials tried to calm the situation, saying Trump's words were misunderstood. But the damage was done, because once national pride awakens, it doesn't sleep again. Canadians weren't calling for walls, they were calling for equality. And around the world, other nations watched closely, realizing that this quiet rebellion wasn't about borders, it was about dignity. The economic shockwave. The boycott soon turned into a global signal. Canadian buyers shifted orders away from U.S. suppliers. Farmers canceled contracts. Tech firms sought partners in Europe and Asia. American analysts began sounding alarms. Billions in trade could be at risk. In Ottawa, trade negotiators worked overtime to expand deals with Asia-Pacific nations and the EU. The message was clear. Canada will no longer depend on one partner alone. Meanwhile, Mexico saw opportunity, forming closer economic ties with Canada as North America's quiet competition began to reshape itself. A comment had become an economic catalyst, one that forced everyone to rethink how fragile respect in trade truly is. The identity awakening. Beyond trade and politics, something deeper was happening. Talk shows asked, "What does it mean to be Canadian?" And the answers came not from politicians, but from people. Truck drivers, teachers, farmers, artists, all saying the same thing. We stand on our own. Canadian-made products gained new life. Local startups saw a surge in support. From coast to coast, the spirit of innovation returned. This wasn't just economic defiance, it was cultural pride reborn. For decades, Canada had been defined by politeness. Now, it was being defined by purpose. And that might just be its greatest power. The global message. As both nations worked quietly to cool tensions, the world took note. Canada's calm, united response became a model of strength through restraint. It didn't need anger to prove power, only principle. American companies began lobbying for reassurance, while Canadian firms found new markets and new confidence. This was no longer about one man's words. It was about how nations define themselves when tested. And for Canada, the message was crystal clear. Friendship is earned through respect, not assumption. In the end, Canada didn't shout. It didn't threaten. It simply stood tall, proud, peaceful, and united. Those 6 words, the 51st state of America, were meant to joke, but they awoke a nation instead. Because sometimes the world needs a reminder that strength isn't always loud. It can be quiet, steady, unbreakable. And when a nation remembers who it is, nothing can shake it. This was more than a moment in politics. It was a rebirth of pride. Because Canada isn't the 51st state, it's the first in its own right. Subscribe for more political deep dives and world-shaping stories, only on the Macrosphere.